Okay.
And you're live.
Okay, this is the March 16th meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. And we're calling the meeting to order at 7:26 after some technical difficulties.
Technical scheduling and all sorts of difficulties this evening.
And the first item of business is to review the agenda for additions, removals, adjustments of any kind. I have no changes, but as we go down through the schedule, we may be considering tabling some things, but we'll deal with that at those points in time. Does anybody else have any comments about the agenda? Okay, and then we'll move on to the next thing, which is the discussion with regional planning and Adam. And we are focusing on two new districts. This time, we're going to set aside high density residential and look at village mixed and or village residential. With pretty much the same format, I believe.
Same format, yes. Let me just mute my sound so that when I join you.
We have that wonderful Zoom feedback.
We don't have the echoing room. So we're just waiting a few minutes for Adam to pull up Zoom on his computer so he can share documents as the discussion goes on.
Okay,
Oops, I made John. I did you. Whoops, my bad. Make you the co-host. There you go.
I think if there is consensus, we'll jump to administrative matters. Anybody have any objections to that? So we don't have any minutes from the last minute to approve, so that's an easy one. Any zoning reports, administrative reports?
Nothing major. Building is picking up rapidly. Weather got nice. Everyone wants to build. So my office has gotten incredibly busy in the last 2 weeks. We're also dealing with some potential add-on violation stuff that people have been discussing, but nothing too critical yet.
Okay,
By next meeting, I should have hopefully a healthy report for you.
thanks. So for miscellaneous correspondence, there wasn't much activity. There was minutes in the package for the bike and pedestrian committee, which seems to be becoming active again, that you can review. The other thing that transpired between the time the agenda went out and tonight's meeting is I received a request from Maren Howell from the Addy Indy for an interview updating for an article on our grant activities. So I did have that conversation with her. I believe she was going to talk to you too, Adam.
I did speak with her, yes.
And it sounds like that may be in this week's Addison. And that is it for miscellaneous correspondence. And just a reminder that we do have an open seat on the planning commission. That takes care of item 4.
Are you ready, Adam?
No,
Okay.
this file is big.
Okay.
And I'd left it open in my drive. And somehow when I came in, it didn't stay open for Zoom. And I've got like 10, it looks like it's 10 minutes, 11 minutes of downloading to open it.
Okay, so we have, again, if everybody's in agreement, we can go to 2B and C. There was a discussion about defining a little bit better expectations of board members, and Melissa agreed to wordsmith a doc, which she's done, and Chris has it up on the screen, maybe. And it went out this afternoon. I don't know if people saw it or not, but it's on the screen, and we take a quick look at it and see if it's makes sense or not. I don't know, Melissa, if you want to describe
Yeah,
it a little bit?
the first two things, anything I put in yellow, highlighted or comments that I was making, these 2 points were in the guidelines, but it seems like they should be outside of the guidelines.
Yeah,
Yeah, those aren't really guidelines. That's what, wait a minute. Wait a
Yeah.
minute. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, these 2 points. I
I
thought
think-
should be in like the rules or whatever in another section.
So I think what happened is when we were considering rule changes, these were pulled out of the rules, but since this wasn't approved as a rule change, they still reside in the rules. So I think we're okay with that, Melissa.
Okay. Yep. And then as you go down, everything in red is what I have written, kind of rewritten and, but if you can pull up the one that's the complete one, I reordered the points so it makes a little more sense. It flows a little better. There you go. Yep.
Take a minute to read it and see if there's any.
See if I
Points
find my
of
own
discussion.
typos too.
My comment on it is, I really like the fact that they're very short, they're very brief, they're very concise. There's no mushy gray wells.
It's good. It's much better than what we had.
Yes.
Anybody else have any comments on it? No.
I do.
Go ahead.
More of a question. I still am not clear, and I realize I missed the first conversation we had as a group about these, but I'm not clear on the purpose of this overall, and how it's sort of enacted or implemented. I'm just not clear on some of the purposes of some of the bullet points.
So I guess I'll interject and then anybody else can comment if they like. And I suggested we include in our policies and procedures, I think is the right term of the document, some bullets about conduct, because a lot of these things are informal, but it's an expectation of commonly expected of boards across all sorts of disciplines. There wasn't an appetite amongst the commission to make it part of policies and procedures. But there was interest in making it a side document so that we have a document that kind of describes how we should conduct ourselves as commission members, but not bog down the policies and procedures with that. So the intent of this document is sort of the side document that just outlines that. And the subtlety is we encourage each other to present ideas and opinions and points of view. There comes a time when, as a commission, we adopt things, and whether it's what you presented or not, once the commission adopts it as a commission, there's a need to understand that point of view, if you will, or that position. It's not intended to modify the person's personal opinion, but it is a fine point when the commission makes a decision that it's the commission's decision, not an individual's decision, or not an individual's decision. So that's kind of my perspective of the background for it.
I mean, I understand that when the board makes a decision takes a vote on something one way or the other, that's the decision of the board. I'm not sure. I mean, that's standard practice, I think, but not sure why we would need to clarify that. I'm a little uncomfortable with one of these bullet points regarding silence as acquiescence. I mean, I don't think that's kind of a leap to me. I mean, silence, what does that achieve if we assume silence is acquiescence?
Rob?
I was gonna say, I think that was intended to try to be a prompt, is the way I read that, that if you don't agree with something, speak up and participate in the discussion instead of holding silent and then disagreeing later.
Well, how is that? Why not just say then, hey, if you have an idea, speak up. That would be a nice, clear prompt. This is kind of a backhanded way into that. Seems like, silence is, I mean, I'm not, going to die on this hill, but I just don't see, how would this come into play, for example? I don't see, like, what would it mean if somebody's silence was assumed to be agreement in the course of, say, one of our deliberations?
Well, I think this is, I personally don't think that any of this should be necessary. But it is good to have this level of expectation put out there that this is how everybody should be conducting themselves, and not, I think that that's intended to be not later after the fact, come back and keep saying, well, I didn't agree with it, but you did it anyway, even though there was no active participation to act on contrary beliefs.
I'm not sure I understand.
I kind of agree a little bit with John on this point. Having been involved, as many of you might have, in a lot of different boards and stuff, I've seen it happen where someone chose not to participate. They might have been intimidated, or they might be bashful or whatever. And then a vote comes up on it and they vote no instead of in agreement, which clearly is where the rubber meets the road on something.
Mhm.
And if a board member is not participating because they're absent, they're not necessarily on board or not. And I think publishing something like this isn't a bad idea. It's kind of like hey, this is how we do things, kind of whatever. But making an assumption for an individual who hasn't said something on a point, I don't think is a good idea.
But we're telling them that we will. I mean, I would think that would encourage people to participate.
Everyone's
It's like,
different.
oh, if I don't participate, they're going to think I agree with everything that whoever is making the point is saying, and I don't. So even if you participate to the point where, which we've done, all of us have done it sometimes, say, well, I don't know if I agree with that point, and I'm not sure, and I'll have to think about it and come back the next meeting. I mean, that is participation.
What if during a given conversation there are several opinions expressed, but somebody doesn't say anything? Which opinion is that silent person agreeing with?
So I would counter that. I mean, this is sort of the antithesis that everybody has a clear and lively discussion. But I think when it comes down to a decision, if you're silent on that decision, that is in a backwards way, and it is a negative look at it. But if you're silent on that position, you tacitly agree to go with whatever the decision of the board is.
Well, but that's different than what this bullet point says specifically. Non-participation by any member during any discussion will be considered a tacit agreement with the opinion expressed. It doesn't mention a vote there or a decision of the board. It just mentions an opinion.
Yeah, point taken, but still,
It's pretty inexact. It's pretty
John,
loosey-goosey.
what if you changed the word discussion to decision? Somewhere along those lines. So I agree with you that it's really what, I think the crux of it is, once the board is ready to vote, sitting back and not participating and then coming back later and saying, well, I didn't agree with that, I didn't say anything, but I think that's sort of what they're trying to, am I
But we-
correct?
I think
I don't
so.
think there's I don't think during a vote, non-participant, I can't talk. During a vote, you have to
Participation, I
vote,
gotcha.
whether it's yes, no, or abstain. You can't opt out of,
That's right. And that's perfectly clear.
yeah, so this is about discussion. I mean, you could be specific and say discussion of a specific point. You know, you could change it to that. Or, I mean, I don't know, we could come up with another way of saying that participation is required if you're going to be on the board, if you're going to be on the committee.
Well, yeah,
I
Well,
mean,
Planning like that would be preferable to any backing
Yeah.
into it way.
yeah, I don't think, and I don't, and to Fred, I think Fred is the one that brought up, is there are people that are not overly communicative, but they'll sit there and deliberate. I think the point here is your opinion is important, and if you aren't voicing it,
Mm.
then you're not like providing another perspective, I guess you could say, maybe.
That's true, but that then is a great leap to assume tacit agreement. You're then putting words in that
Well, I-
person's mouth, it
So I
seems.
think that's the consequence of it. That's not,
Well, are we dealing out consequences here? Or are
Well-
we asking for, guidance or offering guidance for participation?
I think, again, I think the intent is that if you don't participate in it, don't bring it up later. That something contrary.
Can you think of a real life example where this might help clarify what this is trying to achieve? Because I'm having trouble understanding.
well, I mean, to me, I don't want to start dominating the conversation here, but to me, it's exactly as Rob said, is if somebody sits quiet through a conversation. And then after the fact, whether it's in the hallway or the next meeting, said, I didn't agree with that. And it starts over again or something, but
I have another thought. From instances where I've been chairman of committees and you are discussing a point, I always made a point of going around the table and making sure everyone speaks on the matter. And if someone hasn't, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I don't think there's ever been a situation where someone hasn't made even a modest contribution. I think there are ways when you conduct a meeting to make sure everyone does participate, rather than, again, presume something on the part of an individual. And given how different people are, and God knows what goes through their head, I just feel a little uncomfortable to assume, even though I would say probably 75–80% of the time it's an accurate statement, I would say. But I know there are situations where it hasn't been accurate.
okay, let's,
I like the rest of it. I think, Melissa, I think you did a very good job.
yeah.
I really do.
Let's, I was gonna bleed into that. If this one bullet is a hang up. I'd like, I guess when we take action, would make a motion. Somebody could make a motion and then. Except for that particular bullet. And then except, we could put out. Make a motion as that. I mean, this seems to be a struggle point.
Mhm.
And then consider action on that motion if somebody wants to make it.
I have a couple more questions.
Okay,
On the last bullet point, members shall be a positive representative of the planning commission at all times. At all times, I mean, I'm not sure I understand the need to state that. is there,
I think it should say members shall be a positive public representative. Which means you can say whatever you want in your house, but
well, I mean, I don't think any of us give up the right to speak our minds in
Right.
public, not representing any board we may sit on a given issue. So who's going to decide whether that position on an issue is a positive representation of, in this case, the planning commission? Seems hard to, I understand, I think I get the drift, like the aspiration of it, but, man,
can I suggest something maybe? Actually, maybe members shall represent, I don't know, something about being positive about the planning commission as opposed to being a representative of the, or represent the planning commission in a positive light, something like that. I don't.
well,
I don't know if
we
that's-
don't always represent the planning commission on all of our,
No. This is,
Well, I think it goes back as when you're representing the planning commission, you are representing the actions of the planning commission in a positive way. I mean, it's.
well,
and-
does that mean it's not, that criticism of the planning commission is not warranted? If you're a member? If for example, I'll just come up with a hypothetical. If, for example, we discussed a policy issue and there was a vote and the vote was decided one way or the other by one. If the people who were on the short side of that vote felt like they wanted to speak to the broader public on their opinion, would it be out of bounds for them to say, I sit on the planning commission, I'm not speaking for the planning commission, but here's what we're talking about, here's my opinion on it? Would that violate this bullet point?
I think that's undermining
yeah,
trying to work together as a committee.
Adam, are you still downloading?
Yes.
Okay.
But I've got 15 seconds left. Hopefully.
Really? So if in some crazy day, there was a majority of the planning commission that wanted to turn Bristol into a park where no development could happen, and they had that discussion, and there was a minority on the board that said, wait a minute, we need growth and development too. And the majority won, that's fine. Majorities win. But then as public citizens, not as members of the planning commission, could the losing side not turn around to their fellow citizens and say, I participated in this decision. I think the majority made a bad decision, and here's why. I'd like to convince you of that too, so that you don't support it when it comes to a vote.
Because you are exactly trying to undermine the decision that was done and not standing by. I may not agree with it, but that's what the committee decided. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of the vote that was cast in the first place.
So there is no dissension in public allowed if you happen to have a different opinion than the majority on the planning commission?
Of the work of the planning commission.
And these are guidelines. These are not.
Chris, I would appreciate your not participating in this board decision unless we have a dispute about zoning or something. These are in the guidelines you yourself put forward. And
No,
as
I
a
did
zoning
not.
administrator, the guidance from the professional administration organization said that the zoning administration serves as a resource, not as a participant. So in this
Okay.
discussion of policy, I think it's not appropriate unless asked. Sorry to be firm on that, but
Okay.
So. What's your other question?
my other question really is, I think I would have a better sense of what these bullet points and what this whole thing was aspiring to, if I understood the origin of it. What was the first draft of these that came forward, and where did that come from?
I proposed it as a change to the policies and procedures. So I think Adam's ready. I would entertain a motion to table this discussion so we can get on with Adam's discussion and not holding up.
So moved.
Second. Melissa seconds, all in favor of tabling it? Say aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, we'll pick it up at a later date.
Okay, so Chris, I'm gonna try and, can I share the screen?
You should be all set.
Okay. And here. Great. Can you all see that? Let me make it a little bigger.
Little bigger, yeah.
Start losing stuff off the end, but we got too small. I can always go back. So thank you for having me. Sorry for my the time it took. This is a big file with all the maps that I have in it, and it just took a long time to load up in here in Bristol tonight. But thanks for having me with you. What this is, or where we're starting, is basically you can see on the far left column, these are your zones, and these are the dimensional standards of each of your zones. So the lot size, your HDR is 10,000, your ROC is 10,000, your village mix is 15,000, your village residential is 10,000. One of these things is not like the other. Then you can see medium existing lot sizes, minimum and maximum in each of those districts. Same thing with byway front or bylaw frontage. So the frontage on the road frontage, 75, the ROC is only 50. So again, a little different from the others. The rest shows, let's see if I can go over there, I can't. The rest shows, again, the median existing lot sizes, etc. So I'm going to go down from there. We've been through the HDR district. We did not make, I would say, a ton of progress. But we did leave a couple of things on the table. So I would say, we talked about the 75-foot frontage, which we decided not to change it. The lot size of 10,000 square feet for now, we decided not to change it. Duplexes, density, should it be increased? And that was a maybe. We left the door open on that, and we're going to think about perhaps a 50% bonus for duplexes, and potentially the same thing for multifamily housing, which is a conditional use in that district. So we're going to do the same analysis for each of these next districts. Why? Okay. This is your HDR district, and it's hard to see at this scale. I don't know how I can get it bigger, but basically, as we went through, we noted that the lots in blue had basically less than 75 feet of frontage. The lots in red, or excuse me, in yellow, were less than 10,000 square feet, and the lots in green had both problems. And these are existing lots and those seem to be the two real zoning constraints in that district. We're going to do an analysis of basically each of the other districts now as well. And the good news is that most of them do not have the same issues as your HDR district. And this is just a histogram showing, again, the number of units with lot size. So you can see 10,000 to 8,000, you'd gain probably 20 units to conform, and up one, 75 to 60, you'd probably gain another 50 units that would conform. So we didn't think about it, but we left them open, and I just wanted to start there. I'm going to start in your residential office commercial district, which is the district along West Street.
Can I interrupt a minute?
Yes.
So John made the comment that Chris is an administrative person and he shouldn't be commenting on discussions. And that was a individual's statement. And I want to have the board either concur with that or welcome Chris's discussion as part of this and allow him to sit at the table. Does anybody other than John have an objection to Chris being at the table?
I don't have an objection to that, if I could characterize my own words.
Okay.
I
So-
said we were having a policy decision, and I reminded Chris that the guidance from the zoning administrator's handbook is that that's not really the purview of the zoning administrator.
So that may very well be true, but we've been very informal about that, John. And if we're gonna start drawing lines about things, we'll have to get a lot more formal on a lot of other things. So and I'm not hearing anybody else jumping in and agreeing with that comment. So I think that we will continue with our more formal way of things.
This may help. I'm a relatively new member. And Chris isn't a member of the planning commission, or are you ex officio? How does that work?
I mean, in a
But-
sense, he's administrator.
Okay, and so how have you used the administrator in the past in these meetings? Is it a question of, hey, can you help us with this rule, or what, you know, how does it go?
Chris has, and sometimes it rubs. Chris has been involved at various levels. Even though he's not technically part of the planning commission, he doesn't vote, but he has been involved in the conversations routinely. And I think unless I'm out of characterization about saying that.
You know, my guess is you probably don't necessarily get into policy as much as you do about the details of things and having them understand things. Is that fair to say, or no? Yeah. That would be my guess. And I think having someone like Chris would be valuable to get information from, because he's the boots on the
Well,
ground.
he has a perspective, that's what does things in here.
He has the boots on the ground.
And yeah, and also having sat on this board for about 10 years prior to taking this role as well. So I mean, I try to come with experience in helpfulness and.
We'll let you know when you're out of bounds, Chris.
Yeah, and I'm good. And apparently yes, I know that now.
And let me affirm that I know Chris is an important resource for this board and is an important member of these meetings. But is not a member of the board and is there to be a resource and not an equal contributing member, especially on an organizational question of how we organize ourselves and guide ourselves that takes place under the organizational part of
Okay,
our.
that's noted, let's continue.
So it's for the record, it's important for me to state that I know that Chris is an important part of these meetings. I don't object to having them at the table. In fact, I turn to him at times and
John,
ask.
John,
But-
we're done that conversation. You're gonna continue. That you don't have people carrying you on this. We're gonna continue with Adam's discussion.
Okay, so I'm gonna move actually to the village mixed district, because that's what we talked about in the agenda.
Yeah.
So we'll start there. I would note, these are your village mixed objectives guidelines, allowed uses. And then we'll get into the basically the dimensional standards, and I will go to the map and we can talk about what is potentially worth changing. Again, remember that our goal with this grant is to allow for more housing uses in the village of Bristol. So your objective here is the mixed district looks to be seeks to encourage similar development, residential, commercial, light manufacturing within the village planning area. It incorporates and expands recent development opportunities created in Pine Street area and seeks to encourage similar development in other areas, including the town-owned property at Stony Hill. Residential commercial office parks as planned unit developments are encouraged. So again, looking for mix for both commercial and residential. And then it incorporates several municipal uses as well. Single-family dwellings are permitted uses, two-family dwellings are permitted uses, multifamily dwellings are conditional uses, so they have a higher bar. First, they need to demonstrate that they are appropriate in the area, and then they need to satisfy site plan constraints, and those site plan constraints or site plan criteria contain a lot of the things that John has been expressing interest in, so noise, lighting, etc. You'll also note that a lot of the permitted uses have site plan review versus conditional use review. So it's a lower bar. You don't have to go through the first portion of conditional use review. Is it appropriate here? You go right to, well, how do we constrain the noise, or how do we configure the parking or lighting or things of that nature? Whoops. Excuse me. No. Okay. Then we look to dimensional standards. Again, this district has a 15,000, first one, I'll get you down to residential lot size, 15,000 square feet. That's a little bigger than the other village districts that we've talked about. It is also at 2 units per acre, so roughly half of the density of your HDR district. Lot frontage is similar, lot depth is similar. Coverage is substantially smaller or less dense, 20% versus 50%. For the residential portion on the HDR district, for example. Front yard setbacks about the same, maybe a little bigger. Rear yard setbacks about the same, side yard setbacks about the same, building height the same. Now I'm going to show you basically this.
I have a question though.
Yep.
Yeah, if you go back up the 20% residential, so in a building that is this, only 20% of that building can be residential, is that it? Up to 20%.
No, so
No?
what lot coverage means is basically that the buildings themselves, the footprint of the buildings, the impervious surface of the buildings can only cover 20% of the total lot.
Okay, but for residential and then 40% for commercial part,
Correct.
that lot.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so it's kind of the developed or built area. So if you have to leave 80% open, it's going to be a less dense place.
Is 15,000 square feet divided by 2, does that cut it? 15,000 square foot
feet. Yep.
lot size,
Yep.
and then and the residence is 20% of that.
No, so if I had a 15,000 square foot lot, let's say, 20% of 15,000, let's make it something a little easier. Yeah, 15 is, it'd be 3. It'd be 3,000. So you could have a footprint of 3,000 square foot, a building footprint of 3,000 square foot on your 15,000 square foot lot.
But you couldn't put 4 of those.
No, you could not,
The way it
because
stands now.
because you'd
Exceed the
violate
20% rule.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'm going to take you down to the map of this district. We're going to start in Rockydale. So basically you can see the parcels with red in front of them have less than 75 feet of frontage. So they have a violation there. There are 3 of those. And you can see one parcel, that small green one, with less than 10,000 square feet. I'm not sure why that's 10,000 as opposed to 15. I think that's just a mistake, but well, no, it's probably a legitimate partner pre-zoning. I think on this chart, we just made we made an error, and this one, or no. Is this one 10 or this one's 15? 15 for village mix.
Yeah,
15 for village mix. So all the other scales were 10, and I think we just made a mistake there. Basically, the dark gold are commercial and other miscellaneous properties. I'll call it just gold or beige are residential properties. Okay, so
Where does, since I can't see the detail, where does it start on the upper side? Is that at the second bridge, the first bridge over in New Haven before the Lincoln Road?
Rocky Dale does not
Before the bridge.
extend, yeah, that far. So if I expand
Is the
this,
Adventist church on this map?
First bridge is right here.
So it's prior,
Just before
the first bridge as we're heading out of town. Okay,
Isn't there a trailer park?
so Sargent's is right there on the right.
That triangle shaped one is Randy Sargent's property.
Okay.
The mobile home park is this one here. That's
The dark?
yeah, it's the dark one.
so we treated that a little differently because one of the things we can't do is kind of change existing mobile home parks according to the law. So there's not necessarily a lot of use in looking at the density there unless you want to see how close mobile homes are together.
I was just wondering how it was coded.
Moving down into your village. Basically, you can see the Lathrop Mill, or the property that's kind of on the tongue of sticking out into the river on the right-hand side. And then down Hewitt Road and Lovers Lane. So all of the property kind of south of the village, and then coming up the hill towards the fire station. And you can see the fire station. The high school property is a miscellaneous property in this zone. And then on the left-hand side, I think, well, you have your landfill, and then you have Pine Street and your garage and some other residential properties in there. So again, residential properties are beige, commercial or miscellaneous properties are darker gold. You can see dimensionally here, there really aren't very many small lots in this. Most of the lots are greater than 15,000 square feet.
And we have another mobile home park just to the left of the high school, which is very high density residential.
I believe that
That's right.
that falls just outside of this zone.
It does, where's the high school?
The
It's that's over here, friend.
That's the high school.
yep.
So
Okay.
Melissa, did you have your hand up?
Oh, yes, I was just, when you said mix, you said that's mix residential and commercial. So
Yes.
you have to put that together because you're not going to separate all these little chunks of residential. Is that right? Or, because all the beige ones, that's residential, that goes under residential guideline or zoning, right? Or is this different?
I'm sorry, Melissa, would you ask that again?
Yeah, I'm a little, the stuff, everything that's in the, that kind of goldy color, that's the mix, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And the
So-
beige is just residential. It's not,
No.
no, it's not.
So
Okay.
the beige and the gold make up your village mixed district. And
Okay.
the beige are residential uses, the gold are either commercial, or in the case of the high school, municipal, or yeah, I'll call it municipal uses, other type uses. So it's a mixed district. It's got two types of uses in it. It's got some more than two. It's got some commercial, some municipal, some residential. Okay,
Okay.
neighbor or Bristol Works is an example of what you all were thinking of when I think when the planning commission created this. So Bristol Works is kind of in the middle of the screen. Well, it's let's see, it looks something like this. Thank you, like a shoe, yes. You know, that's a mixed use property, right? It's got both residential property and it's got commercial property in there. I think it's not, well, I'll say it and you all can correct me, but when you were making this, after you made the village planning area, the Lathrop, part of the Lathrop land and the Lathrop mill was included in the village mix for potentially commercial and or residential redevelopment. So that's how this zoning district came to be. We went over the uses for it. It's a mixed district. It can be residential and light industrial commercial uses. So looking to add to I would say looking to add to the fabric of your village, support your village, and include a little area around it. So it's not out of the question that the dimensional standards should be similar. You know, you can see from this map, there aren't a lot of issues with your dimensional standards. Either your size, except that this one is 15 as opposed to 10, which is the dimensional size of all your other zoning districts. So it's a little bigger. And I would tell you, I did get at the very start of this process, I did get a letter from Elise Schanbacker, who runs Addison County Community Trust. And commented that this was an area that if you want it to be a residential area, you should match the density to your HDR district. So and they were the developers of the firehouse units. And I don't know if you recall, but this town of Bristol had to get some extra land and add it to that area. To develop the firehouse districts. Chris can
With
probably
the
tell you.
added number of units.
Yes, with the added number of units that they wanted, so. You know, she felt that the town probably shouldn't have to go through that exercise, and one way to do that would be to increase the density, so that was her comment with regard to this unit, this district. So I'm going to take you back up to your regulations, and we can talk about.
Well, we've got the map there. I've got it. Has anybody got any comments or questions about the map so far? So,
Well, only comment I have, is there one more district within the village?
there's,
There are three others that we're going to look at. So
Okay,
we will also look at,
it's a downtown thing, right?
there's the downtown, we'll look at that one last, and I want the that's where Bristol's water and sewer is largely. And I don't think your water,
Water goes out to most of the village.
excuse me, but yes, water. And so the reason I'm saving that is there's legislation basically in this session that's passed. I don't believe it's been signed yet. But it's passed and it will require certain densities. So I basically, one of the last things we do is I want to match that area with both water and sewer to the state statute, to the new state statute. So we'll look at that one. There's the village residential, which largely surrounds your HDR district to the east and the north. So up basically butting up against the mountains and then off to the north. And excuse me.
I said up North Street.
Yep, up North Street. And then there's the ROC district. And the ROC district is largely West Street from the high school to the downtown center. district. So it's a relatively small district that encompasses just that one.
Maybe you're gonna touch on village residential, sort of perimeter.
I thought that's what I just talked about when I was talking about being east.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
That's down by the Plank Road.
Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
So I guess my question is, and maybe I'm not sure if I'm thinking about this the right way, but with all these relatively large lots, how we look at the current areas and all that kind of stuff affects subdivision in all these areas.
yes, it does.
And also how we look at potentially changing that stuff may make it more attractive.
If you make it more dense, right, or if you allow for greater density, then chances are someone would be able to build more on it and increase the value, and that would increase the value of the land as well. Yes.
And then, if I, and we probably do this a lot, but we've segregated a district by a road. And so on one side of the road, you've got a given district, and on the other side, you've got another district, as opposed to having that road plus some given amount of area on the other side. I don't know, has that ever been talked about, or is that ever considered, or?
Yeah, when we did that, it was honestly, it was to create clean maps. Because we talked about chasing property lines and changing that when we did this originally, and it was really following, like, you're talking about like Hewitt Road?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of the intent, was to keep it very clean and crisp for growth center, for growth vision.
Anybody else have any comments before we go on to the next? Okay,
Okay, so I'm gonna go back up to your village mixed district and to your dimensional standards. And like I say, the standards that I guess I'd like or suggest that we focus on, because there weren't a lot of problems in this area, would be your residential density. 2 units per acre is what it currently is. Your residential lot size, it's currently 15,000 square feet. Your lot coverage, if we increase the density, reduce the size of the lot, you may want to revise your lot coverage. And that's really it. You don't have, I mean, you didn't have many setback issues too from front yard setbacks from the center of the road line in this district. So
The only one on setbacks, maybe that would be the rear yard to mimic the side yard. Just to make it consistent. Most communities, that seems to be a consistent number. Instead of having one for, sometimes rear and side yard are.
hard to distinguish what they are,
Yeah.
which one's rear and which one's side. So
Everything's a square, come on.
Yeah, so I mean, I get the front yard setback to create that sort of buffer, but after that, it's really 15 or 20 or 25 foot perimeter around your property. It's matched in.
and that would be easier for you to administer, certainly.
And for people to understand too, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Did you have a proposal for rear yard, side yard? Chris,
We could,
or not?
I would match the HDR, which I think is 15 in both, no, yeah, it's 15 for both for primary structures.
Let's start with what I hope's an easy one. get a little momentum under our belt. So it would just be changing the rear yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet.
Yeah.
Any comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
It's not on this exactly, but will there be a point at which we can discuss the uses for this district too?
Sure. The thing that I would be most interested under this grant is whether or not you wanted to switch multifamily from conditional to permitted with site plan review or approval. And so I guess I'd say that's certainly on the table, because it impacts the housing and it goes to the grants. If there are other things there for uses that you think impact, the grant and housing, I'd say bring them up and the rest of your planning commission can decide whether or not it's an appropriate discussion.
When would be a good time to have that discussion, Mr. Chairman? I don't want to distract from the coverages and stuff that we're well into here, so.
Yeah, so
Kevin, if we got through the dimensional standards and then moved to the uses on for this particular zoning district, I think that'd be appropriate.
okay. To keep it together as opposed to doing it as a look at all the districts at the end of this discussion.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about uses here anyway, so
Yeah, okay.
that'll be my suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, so I believe where we were is Chris had said it would be easier to administer the regs if the rear and side yard setbacks were the same. Currently, they're 25 feet and 15 feet. Chris noted that your high density residential district, the main village area that we've been talking about for the last couple of meetings is basically 15 feet. So I guess I'd ask, how does the board feel about moving the dimensional standards or changing the dimensional standard for the rear yard setback in the village mixed district to 15 feet to match the side yard setback?
And we're meaning here, structure has to be 15 feet away from a property line,
Correct,
on the sides and the rear.
correct.
Okay.
And one concern some people have is buffering between residential and commercial uses. There's actually provisions, a landscaping provision, that if a commercial use or industrial use butts up to a residential, it's a required 25-foot landscaping buffer. That's later on in our regs. So there is some protection for the residential, if somebody wanted to do that.
Thank you for the clarification on that.
Yeah, the different uses, it's.
So
We'll hear a lot of discussion.
So this wouldn't impact that at all.
Nope.
okay, unless I don't hear anybody, well, Kevin, unless I don't hear anybody screaming, I guess I've heard that change proposed. Does everybody, can you just do it by consensus?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not sure. We haven't been taking formal motions at this point. It's been. Nobody's squawking and we should move on.
Will there be a vote on the whole thing at the end?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think the dicey thing will be, once we get this all gelled and take a look at it cohesively,
Mhm.
that'll probably generate a certain amount of discussion at that point as well, and then we'll have to
Figure it out.
figure it out and agree on a vote on it and come up to some sort of agreement.
Okay, the other three provisions that I would suggest, you're welcome to talk about any of them, but I would suggest that we look at basically the density, the residential density, 2 units per acre. The residential lot size, 15,000 square feet. And if you choose to change those, the residential lot coverage of 20%. Because they all impact one another.
What was the purpose of the 20%? Can you recall? Is that, we have to ask Bill Sayre that question since
Yeah,
he's got the history on this. Do you know, Bill? You're muted, I think.
there we go.
Thanks, Brett. It had to do with the combination of stormwater, I think, although that didn't come till later years. In the beginning, I think it was the issue of a building being disproportionately large to the size of the lot. And the idea being that a building of a given size would look fine or even small on a very big lot, but you get to a smaller lot, it looks bigger. And there was some discussion, as I recall, about the difference between 40% for commercial and 20 for residential, if I'm reading it correctly and remembering correctly, that commercial would have, in this particular district, commercial was a welcomed and compatible use. Being, what's the name of the district again? Is
Village
it
mixed,
mixed? Okay,
yes. With
Yep.
objectives of basically mixed commercial and residential use.
yeah.
So that makes sense, Bill.
Well, I'm glad something I say does, Fred. Thank you.
Interesting.
So what's the pleasure? So I believe the question before us is, how do we want to change residential density, residential lot size, and lot residential coverage?
Do you think it's appropriate in this district? Do you want to? And if you do, what would you like it to look like?
What do you think, Rob?
So if I'm not mistaken, village mixed is basically encompassed by is surrounded by HDR and village residential and commercial.
Yes,
It's not up against RA2 or,
there may be some small places where it is. But for the most part, to the east is your high density residential. To the southwest is your commercial, and to the north is your village residential.
okay. I was just trying to, in my mind, say how much of a bridge was this meant to be with the different lot size and density between the downtown HDR area and the RA2 area? Was that the intent with the larger lots and the less density to get that scale of density and the kind of that gap in between?
So I tell you, your village residential definitely kind of was a bridge. Right, it was less dense outside your HDR district, outside what I call your real village district, but, and then it was kind of some of your transitioning area to the more rural areas of Bristol. I think that's not necessarily true of Village Mixed. I think Village Mixed was looked at, that it had some existing industrial, it had some existing residential, it had some large lots. It was a place, you had Bristol Works as an example of something that had been redeveloped, and I think the planning commission looked as good for Bristol. Again, you had the Lathrop lot to the south. So, and the Stony Hill property, which the town is looking to redevelop. So I think it was more adding to the fabric of your village HDR core.
Mhm. I think if it's surrounded by other zones that are 10,000 square foot minimum lot size, it should probably be closer in line with that. As far as the density goes, that would come into play in a PUD situation more so than a straight subdivision situation where you still are allowed one unit on a 10,000 square foot lot, even though it doesn't meet the density number. So that's with some of these lots, there's definitely the potential in some of these areas to do something like that. And that would be a limiting factor. So I don't have an answer on the density. I'm torn on that one.
Whether it's 2 units or 4 units or
Something else. Yeah.
Okay.
Melissa,
I think
Whoops, you muted yourself.
sorry.
Okay.
I think that would be a reasonable change.
What would be reasonable?
I'm sorry, go to 10,000 for the lot size.
what about the density and lot coverage?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that because I know, I mean, I don't know. I think that the lot coverage, I would think that would still remain the same because if it's a smaller lot, as Bill said, it's you don't want a 9,000 square foot, maybe you don't want a 9,000 square foot commercial building on 10,000. So, Kevin,
Yes,
I'm sorry. I have been trying to fight through this, but are we still going to be okay if I leave the meeting? Because my head is just starting to
Bill
pound.
Bill joins, so you still have a quorum.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
We will. Okay. I'm sorry. I got my eyes dilated today, and even though my vision is back to normal, I'm just having a headache, and it's just getting worse.
no. Well, we'll, yeah, you're welcome to leave and feel better.
Yeah. I apologize for that, and I'll know where we are so I can read them. Make sure I read the minutes.
Okay.
And see what y'all talk about.
Sure,
All right. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks.
Fred, what do you think?
I want to think about the, 20% piece, some of what Bill makes sense. And I have a living example where it would have made sense if something like that, even in a different district, came into play. But I would very much be interested in making multifamily units more acceptable in this district without it being a conditional use type of a thing, I believe. And again, we're talking about housing. And we've got single family homes and then multifamily homes, and the pressure certainly in affordable type stuff. And with the nature of Vermont and the nature of households now, small units is where there's a lot of demand, multifamily units, whether it's a condominiumized something, or whether it's someone putting a 4-unit apartment building. And I think the village areas, those are things that I would like to see it be easier to do if we are making it a little harder to do. I could also see making 3 units in an acre rather than 2 and increasing by 33% what's possible. And maybe tweaking the 20% rule a little bit, but I'd have to think about that in terms of what I'd be comfortable with. Again, focusing on residential. And of course, they probably created this district so as we didn't gobble up all the commercial possibilities, which, you know, everyone wants everything to be close to the center of something, right? I mean, it's ridiculous up there in with their thinking. They don't live in real. But we have precedents. And of course, that's the way New England towns grew up to begin with, because the power was and the rivers and whatever, where all the homes were developed. So gobbling it all up for some residential, because we make residential so much more valuable, is something to think about. So I don't know that I'd want to go crazy, but so those are my thoughts on the subject.
One of the things, just to kind of expand on that, as far as the multi-family homes, the density would definitely need to increase to make that a possibility, even because of the number of units for the amount of land that it
Well, I
would
would say
require.
1 unit is considered, even though there's 4 units in it, 1 building is considered would satisfy the 20% or whatever the case might be. That's how I would view it. And so maybe the 20% has to be revised, but I would view it that way.
Yeah, the dwelling per acre. That's what I was referring to.
Okay. Is a 4-unit apartment building a dwelling, or is it 4 dwellings?
4.
Yeah, see, I screwed that. In my opinion.
Do you think a 4-unit apartment building should be treated the same as a single family home?
And from the standpoint of the ability to do it, there might be some parking things, other tweaks you'd have to do it. None of this is simple, is it? You know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I think you can see in the village here, since I've been here for 48 years, there were mostly single family homes. How many buildings now are, they're apartmentized? Whether they're big homes on Pleasant Street or whatever, because that's where the pressure is. Right around me, it's mostly multi-family units. Certainly can compared to what it was years ago, and I think that pressure is going to continue to exist. The average household size in Vermont is what? It's pretty small, isn't it? 2.1 or something?
2.41.
Is it? I mean, really?
My numbers may be a little dated, but it's not big.
And it's gotten
going
smaller, it hasn't gotten bigger.
Yes.
So just on the density piece, to follow up on Fred's, the current density is actually stymied a couple projects. Woodland Apartments on Lover's Lane wanted to expand. And when she proposed it originally, it was to add 8 or 10 more units down there. And when it all was said and done, with all that land that they own, they could add 6. These are the density and what they already have. Didn't make any sense. The footprint was going to be no different. So I'm back to where Fred is talking. Firehouse Apartments, again, it really didn't change scope and scale, but they had to acquire about 4 acres of extra dirt to pull that off at the scale they were. And what they bought was garbage land, just so they had the acreage. So maybe playing around with something, maybe 1 and 2 family density, is it 2? And if you get into multifamily, maybe you could increase it for multifamily. It's sort of a playing around with that concept.
And septic would certainly be an issue. We can't allow such a high density where we don't have a public sewer system. You've got to be able to handle it, and I don't know what the text would say is the appropriate size for umpty bathrooms and whatever. And if you have a 4-unit or even a 3-unit place, it's more flushes, probably.
They base it on bedrooms,
Do they do?
yeah,
Yeah, I think
so,
I've heard that.
and it's a little over 400 for a 3-bedroom house.
Yeah, so
400 gallons per.
to me, it would
hundred and
make-
forty a bedroom for the first 3.
so it makes sense to factor that into, but I'd love to see the multifamily unit thing in what area we're talking about, and even on a little bit on the surrounding area made easier. Because I think it's stuff like that that's gonna make a big difference in affordability. And where you're gonna, if you really want to build more units, you have the ability to do that. And it can be done without messing up a lot of what is really nice about Bristol, I believe, if it's done smartly.
Okay, Bill, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'm mostly listening, but I do think whatever we change, we should be very careful in considering what the consequences might be that we haven't thought of yet. But I'm open to some of what Fred's been considering. I just hope we don't go too far with it.
Okay, thanks. And John?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see us really consider, pushing the density, like really allowing density down there, or, throughout this district. It's a good spot for it, we need the housing, and I'd say let's really consider what that might look like. And Adam, I don't know if you could help us decide what the range of like how far could we go towards encouraging density in the village mixed, and identify. It seems like from the map, which is not up in front of us now, but it just seemed like there's a lot of room for that, and my ongoing concern, and I know you've heard this before, but is I'm all for density as long as we also put into place things that make density really livable. That if we invite density, that we have the rules and regulations or the bylaws or what have you, ordinances that make the density really livable for the people who live it. So as long as that's addressed, then I'd say let's explore the possibilities of really pushing density in some of these areas. And maybe it's not all in what is now delineated as the village mixed zone, but maybe there's a chunk of it down on Hewitt Road, for example, or Lover's Lane, or elsewhere that could be, maybe it's a sort of, I don't know how this is done, but a sub-district or something where there's more density, or just a different district. But yeah, I'm favoring density. And I don't know, Adam, like with the parameters of what we discussed tonight, would you call that sort of the middle road of density, or like pushing it in a more dense direction? Or how do you, it's hard to have a relative sense of what we're proposing,
So let me ask you this, how, and I guess I'd say I'd prefer that you think about the districts that you have all together and not create sub-districts. If you want to change some boundary lines, that's another discussion, and we can certainly have it within the village planning area, but I'd encourage you, if you can live with them, to live with them, so we can focus on the density within them.
Yep.
My question for you, all of you, is how would you feel if this area looked like what I'd call your HDR district, or the kind of the center of your village district, with something like Bristol Works mixed in, which it really sits right in the middle of the village district, or just at the northern end.
If I could reply to that first, since I have my open mic, I, for one, would favor that, and in fact was around at the inception of the village planning area and a reconsideration of the zones, some years ago, not on the board, but as an active citizen participation in the process that created the village planning area. And it was clear at that time that not only members of the planning commission, but the public, which was very engaged at that time in that decision, saw the village planning area and therefore the village mixed district that we're talking about now as basically an extension. And in fact, I believe it used the phrase, the language for the village planning area used the phrase, foreseen as an extension of the existing village, right? So I, for one, would like to see that kind, the village density of HDR extended all the way through the village mixed.
So, John, if you look at the objectives and guidelines of your current zoning for the village mix, you pretty much nailed as to what it says. Promote opportunities for employment and housing with an easy walkable core of the village, promote mixed-use development intended to extend Bristol's village to the west and south, and offer a mix of residential, commercial, light manufacturing opportunities within the village planning area.
Yeah, and if I could remind the board, because I was very actively involved in drafting not only this language and other language that has survived some rewrites even over the years, but it was very, very much the public consensus at the time that throughout the village planning area and including the village mix, that we wanted to go in that direction and protect that area from heavy industry, for example, and the kind of impacts that would tend to discourage housing, or at least quality housing. So, that was the purpose. And I, for one, would love to see that, advanced.
So to circle back around to Adam's question is, it sounds like we are generally in favor of adjusting to more dense development in this area, and how far do we go? Obviously, I think the density boundary would be the HDR. You would certainly want to go more dense than what that district is today. And so there's that area to play in with what is allotted today and what would seem like be the bound, which would be HDR. So, and I've heard comments like not to squeeze out industrial or businesses, favor high density, multifamily. So maybe that's a bonus situation. Who knows? And not go as far as for single family dwellings. And I'm not sure, we haven't really talked about duplexes, but certainly for single family dwellings, what I've heard is we don't want to go all the way to what HDR is, but maybe halfway, which would be go from 2 to 3 or something as an example. And if I'm recapping, so based on what I'm recapping, is that an accurate portrayal for us all to work on and digest? Start with you, John. Is that reasonable?
That's a good summary. Yes.
Okay, Bill, what do you think?
Well, that sounds reasonable to me, Kevin. And as I've been reflecting on this, I do hope we'll take advantage of the opportunity to encourage some business in this area too, so that people can walk to work or ride a bicycle. But yeah, move a little towards high density, but maybe halfway, maybe not quite halfway, but certainly in that direction.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Yeah, I'm with that.
And Melissa's gone, and Rob.
Yeah, I agree. There's the potential to move it to.
So is that
I'm
Get
gonna,
enough of a picture for you to
Yeah.
massage some things?
what I will do is come back with, a couple different scenarios for each type, or for basically each dimensional standard and for, the units themselves. So for, single, duplex, multifamily, and let you kind of choose between them and hopefully come to consensus as to what you all think might work for that district. So that's what I will do for you next time. I know it's getting late. What I might want to do is, since we talked about multifamily units a little bit, again, it's currently a conditional use in this district. How would you all feel about making a permitted use with site plan review? So the site plan review, John, goes to the things, some of the things that you're concerned about.
As long as the state's gonna let us do that, sure.
Well, again, I don't think this area has water wastewater, right?
Correct.
It doesn't have both, it does not have.
We only have
wastewater.
water.
So I understand what you're saying, and I've been waiting for that bill to pass into law to review it again. So I've seen it, I've reviewed it, but I haven't really gotten in deep. But yes, so I understand what you're saying. But I think if you had it with site plan, I believe you could do that. It would make it a little easier because you wouldn't have to go through the conditional use part of the review. It would just be the site plan review. And people are going to be going through subdivision anyway, which also gets to a lot of your site, probably for multifamily units in this area, which gets to a lot of your site plan conditions too.
Yes,
Okay.
I think we just lost a quorum.
We did.
I think you did.
So any closing comments for, I think you're,
We're not,
I'm
I don't think
hearing,
there's anything to take direct action on.
no,
There-
not
it's
listening, but I'm hearing
I'll-
particularly Fred was impassioned about making it easier, so
I'll include that proposal, just that small change as
Yeah.
part of your review for next time.
this bill discussion, so.
Yep.
Any final parting wisdom?
I just have one request for some future, for some future meeting, the use I'm concerned about in Village Mixed is business yard, which is a relatively recent addition to the zone. And I'd like to have a little time to discuss how that is played out and whether we want to keep that as a conditional use in this zone.
Yeah.
Because and the reason, and that's not just a random thing, because the reason is I think it potentially impacts the housing ability or the appeal of housing, in adjacent properties.
Okay. Anything else?
I do have one other question that's not about this subject, but I don't know if that's appropriate at this point.
We're getting kind of late here, but are we quick?
It's quick. It's just, there's this parked issue that keeps coming up, and I'm just wondering, it's sort of in the parking lot, I think, as you say in your briefing. And it regards a downtown property, and I just wonder why that's lingering, and if there's a communication on it that we could read, or what is that?
I think that parking lot issue summarizes the request. And when we get to that district, we'll talk about it.
Is there a communication to the planning commission that?
There was a communication, it was verbal, it was at a meeting a while ago, probably almost a year ago. You remember this,
Tom Wells,
Tom Wells thing?
yeah,
It's been a year,
at least.
so
I can tell you, Tom also called me and asked me about it, so. And I basically told him I hadn't really read the parking lot memo, but I said, we're gonna work through these districts first, and when we get to the district that's in.
Yeah.
It will be something that I make sure your planning commission looks at, and they will decide how they choose to address it.
It just seems like the request is really more something for the design, for the development review board than the planning
Yeah.
commission.
So, let's leave the question right there, John, because it's on the parking lot as a reminder for when we talk about that district,
Okay, thank you,
as opposed to now.
thank you.
I don't believe we have any public, but I'll ask for public comment. Hearing none, the next action is to move for adjournment. Anybody?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Rob. John seconds, all in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, see you next month.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.